Thank you very much indeed. I'm going to talk this afternoon, if I may, about the fact that there are several strands in the great debate that we're having about the difference of opinion between people who have a religious outlook and those who don't. And to some extent, the distinctions I want to draw were prefigured by my predecessor at the podium here, Mr. Pataki. You will notice if you, after tea time, are alert and stay awake long enough, that there will be one or two slightly different approaches to some of the issues that were raised then. But one thing that I very much agree with Mr. Pataki about is that questions of metaphysics, which is about the nature of the universe and what it contains, are importantly different from questions about religion, which of course is man-made and a sociological phenomenon that has persisted throughout recorded history at very least. But there will be one or two differences between us, as you'll see, on certain other matters. The distinction I want to draw is between those metaphysical questions about the nature of the universe and questions about the place of religion in the public square, which is essentially the secularism issue, and about which we've heard a good deal this weekend already. And those two are again separable from, although there are very natural connections with, questions about what is now called humanism, or secular humanism, understood in our contemporary setting as a family of views about ethics, about how we live our lives and how we construct societies that are amenable to the living of good individual lives. And it's important to say something about all three of these things, although it's possible and significant to take the secularism issue and the humanism issue together. It was a very long time ago, Aristotle pointed out that questions of ethics as they apply to individuals and questions of society which concern the right construction of a society that conduces to good individual lives are of course seamlessly connected. Ethics and politics run together, and when Aristotle wrote his great set of lectures on ethics, he said that the next automatic question that follows is the question about how you construct a society, and that was his lectures on the politics. But first let me say a little bit about the metaphysical issue. It's a significant one, not just because it bears on this question that we are largely agreed about here, which is that this universe of ours doesn't contain supernatural agencies in it, but because there is another debate, or a parallel one to the metaphysical one, premised on the use of a certain expression, which I want to argue is a very deeply misleading expression or phrase. And the phrase in question is religion and science, as though somehow or other this denoted a connection or a difference or an opposition or a complementarity, where significant questions really do arise about the relation of religion in general and science. I mean, it has been pointed out that there is one science and there are many religions, but noticing that fact doesn't stop the debate about the connection or relationship or lack of either between religion and science being debated and raised in ways that are actually inimical to science and to science education. And therefore, this is a very important point. It's an important point because there are a number of different views that people don't very often put into connection with each other about whether science and religion are complementary but non-overlapping. This is the Stephen Jay Gould view about non-overlapping magisteria. That the natural and social sciences address themselves to a phenomena that can be empirically investigated, whereas religion addresses itself to matters of the spirit, to the transcendent realm, to the divine. And this was something which seemed tremendously important to people in the early part of our modern era, in the 16th and 17th centuries. For example, Descartes was particularly anxious to try to persuade the church of which he was a loyal, lifelong member, the Catholic Church, that they could allow science to go on uninterrupted, that they needn't feel anxious about it, because science was addressing itself to phenomena that wasn't really the concern of the religious authorities, that their concern was much more a moral and a spiritual one. And this was a matter that pressed for people at Descartes' time, because Descartes himself Galileo, Giordano Bruno, various other people were under pressure from the church not to say things about the nature of material reality that conflicted with Scripture. Famously, the pressure point was the adoption or agreement with the Copernican view, the Copernican heliocentric view of the universe, or not. In the year 1600, Giordano Bruno was burnt to death in the Campo dei Fiori in Rome because, among other things, he accepted the Copernican view. Cardinal Bellarmine famously wrote to a cleric who had sent him a letter arguing that Scripture was consistent with Copernicus, saying to this errant cleric that all he had to do was to read Psalm 102, which says that the Lord hath laid the foundations of the earth, that it may not be moved forever, and also citing all the fathers and all the theologians who said that the earth doesn't move and stays at the center of the universe, and that in his prudence, said Cardinal Bellarmine, he should accept this view of the heavens. Then, of course, Galileo himself had to acknowledge that the earth had never moved for him, which was a rather sad reflection. And even though, of course, on his way out of the Inquisition chamber, he did mutter to somebody, "Epo si muove," but it does move for all that. And he spent the rest of his life under house arrest because of it. At that time, the church itself took the view that religion was a direct competitor with science for the truth. It was a direct competitor with science for an understanding of the physical universe and how it worked. Of course, since then, it's given up that view, and just very recently, less than 20 years ago, Rome announced that it had been wrong about Galileo, so it's okay to accept the Copernican view. So now we think that the Church may itself have at long last agreed with Descartes and with Stephen Jay Gould that these are non-overlapping magisteria, that science and religion have quite different spheres of interest, and that in that sense they complement one another, because where science has a great deal to say, there is nothing of moment for the spiritual and moral in our lives, and where religion has a great deal to say, there is an acceptance that the deity might have created a universe which runs according to natural law, runs according, as Descartes wanted to put it, according to mechanical principles like a clock which had been wound up and let going, and that the two therefore could be investigated and discussed separately. But the truth is, of course, that the great religions all have views about the origin and nature of the universe and its destiny, which at a number of points do impinge on the scientific worldview, and where therefore there is a direct competition over the truth, which of the two general outlooks has the right way of thinking about things. And it's important to come back to that, because it suggests something uncomfortable for people who do have a religious outlook, namely that if ever they're able to state something about their religious view which is not obscure or equivocal or ambiguous or wrapped in mystery, if they could ever say anything clear and direct about what they think about the world, that it could, in principle, be testable by science. But as you know, there is an escape clause in almost all religions, which is that God will not be tested. So you can't conduct scientific investigations to test religious claims. I remember once being asked by somebody who went like this, and started and said, "What's this?" And the answer was, "It's God moving in a mysterious way." And this is what the theologians will say if you ask them if there is something that could be directly challenged or tested by a scientific investigation. However, there is another difficulty which is illustrated by the work of the Templeton Foundation. I don't know whether you've ever heard of this extremely rich foundation, which gives a prize every year, the Templeton Prize, worth more than the Nobel Prize, to anybody, and this includes, and especially, they especially like scientists and philosophers who will do this, who will make noises friendly to religion. And they fund quite a lot of scientific research. They also give a great deal of money to theology and to apologetical work and to religious publications. And I thought I might just bring along with me some examples of the things that they fund, so that you would see that the question of the relation between science and religion still somewhat presses in our contemporary world, and one reason why, therefore, this metaphysical debate needs to be continued. And it goes like this, and it's just some examples of a program they have, which is called Science in Dialogue, meaning in dialogue with religion. Science in Dialogue. And it says here, the Foundation, Templeton Foundation, has a strong interest in projects that bring one or more scientific disciplines into a mutually enriching discussion with theology and or philosophy, whether for a scholarly audience or the public at large. So one this is a list of their featured grants, the ones that they're rather pleased with. The Evolution and Theology of Cooperation, the Emergence of Altruistic Behavior, Forgiveness, and Unselfish Love. And another one is Research Fellowship in Religion, Spirituality, and Health. Another one is Science and Religion in Islam. And another one is Darwin and Religion. And the sorts of people who are given these grants are, in the case of the Evolution and Theology of Cooperation, a person who is the head of the Evolutionary Dynamics program at Harvard Divinity School, and in the case of Spirituality, Theology and Health, a group of people who work in the Sociology Department at Duke University and at the Interdisciplinary University of Paris. So these are serious institutions which are getting this money, and you notice when you look at the titles of the grants that there is an embranglement, to use a wonderful term coined by Bishop Berkeley, between science and religion, trying to implicate or insert into one sphere of activity, the scientific, the religious, and vice versa. And the main reason for this, of course, is to retain a sense of respectability for religion by association with science. Right? Scientific endeavor, the giving of grants to what look like major research projects, but they are joint interdisciplinary research projects, and so this maintains an aura of respectability for religion. And so the question does arise, what are people wanting to mean when they use this phrase, religion and science, as though either there is a complementarity or there is a connection between them, or something can be learned from one for the other. And the argument I want to put is that one can learn something about religion and religious sensibility, which is, of course, a very complex thing because there are many religions and there are many religious phenomena, including mystical phenomena and the like, that can be studied scientifically. A neurologist friend of mine once told me that he had a patient come to see him who was a retired Don at university, in fact at Edinburgh University, and this patient said to him, "I think I've had a stroke, and moreover I think I've had a stroke in the occipital lobe of my brain on the right-hand side." And my neurologist friend was very used to people self-diagnosing from the internet and coming up with all sorts of very peculiar complaints. And he said, "Well, why do you think that?" And this retired academic said, "Because there are figures rising up out of the floor and floating up into the sky in my left visual field." It turned out when he had a scan that he had a minor stroke in the visual part of the visual center of the brain. And when the little blood clot had resolved after a couple of weeks, the angels that kept floating up out of the floor vanished. But the academic knew that they weren't angels. He knew that they were symptomatic of some cerebral accident, some minor brain damage. But if he had not been an academic, and if he had lived in another time in history or another place in the world today, he would have been having religious visions. And if one thinks about the accident in the past or in contemporary life of people getting overtired or having an epileptic fit or a fever or getting drunk or eating a magic mushroom, or all the different reasons why people might have encounters with the gods and then interpreted them as real eruptions into a different realm, and that they were somehow getting messages from elsewhere, maybe George W. Bush had these sorts of encounters on a regular basis, you could see how they would reinforce the sense that there is a reality that is being encountered. Now, science can address this. Science can look at these sorts of phenomena and very often find really rather good reasons why they occur. Psychology, empirical psychology, can also look at the very well recognized and attested phenomena of conviction and of joy, of exaltation, of exhilaration that comes in very large megachurch meetings when they are, as was described last night in a very amusing way, brought to it by a skilled orator, somebody who has marvelous command of rhetoric and can lead a group of people, a demagogue. I mean, we've seen it in the film footage with Hitler doing it with tens of thousands of people, and it can happen in mega churches as well. Induced sense of the reality of the alleged truths. And this, again, is something that can be studied by empirical science. But it is not at all clear what can be offered from religion to science. Should one, one's got a puzzle about elementary particles, how do they get mass? If we don't get energy levels sufficiently high at the Large Hadron Collider in CERN, can we find out anything about the Higgs boson by looking at the Rig Veda or at the Quran? And it's not clear that we're going to have much success in that direction. So whereas we can expect to learn a great deal about the phenomena of religious experience and religious sensibility by the work of the empirical sciences, natural and social sciences, it's not clear that we're going to get anything in the opposite direction. And that leads us to ask some questions, really, about this alleged relationship which seems to be connoted by the phrase religion and science. Because little reflection shows that science as a sort of corporate entity, itself very various, ranging from fundamental physics all the way to geology and meteorology and, lots of ologies, and religion, which is also an extremely various set of phenomena as well, that the relationship between them is by no means as simple or straightforward as the phrase seems to suggest. But we know one thing, that what is characteristic of scientific inquiry, the scientific mindset, if you like, which asks questions of nature and of human beings and of society in ways that can be tested, looks for the kind of evidence that could support conclusions drawn about nature and society and human beings, which is always open to refutation. It is intrinsically defeasible. It can be met by counter-evidence, and if you meet with strong counter-evidence, you either reformulate your hypothesis or you abandon it and look for an alternative. There's something about the scientific mindset which is always questing, always open to refutation, which is not made anxious by the fact that we don't have all the answers, but indeed is enthused by that fact to go and look for answers, or to try to formulate questions that admit of answers. Whereas what is characteristic of the religious mindset flows from the fact that we human beings are very eager for stories. We want an account, an explanation of things that has a beginning, a middle, and an end, and which is explanatory and which is reassuring. And it's a very notable fact that whereas most religions can be explained, and the message of salvation, for example, associated with Christianity, can be explained very briefly, probably doesn't take as much as half an hour, it takes some years to get to grips with the basics of physics or the biological sciences. This is one reason why, of course, the religions are very attractive. It doesn't take so much thought, and also they convey those certainties that we're all very anxious to have. So there is no consistency between what is characteristic of the scientific mindset and what's characteristic of the religious mindset. Remember that in the major religions of Christianity and Islam, unquestioning faith and obedience to the tenets of the faith and to the ministers of the faith is regarded as a major virtue. And St. Paul said, of the three virtues, hope, love, and faith, that faith was a very important one. When doubting Thomas wanted to have proof, he wanted to stick his finger into the wound, he was sort of told off because all the others had believed but they hadn't seen. And Søren Kierkegaard, makes it a great virtue that faith is sometimes something one commits oneself to in the very face of evidence, that one takes a leap into all the counter-arguments and embraces and accepts a certain kind of view. And this is very, very different indeed from science. Someone once very aptly said, where faith begins, science ends. So there's no consistency there, and therefore the phrase religion and science is one which has a very misleading connotation. One thing that one can say about them, and you have to remember that the apologists of religion are very keen to say, well, look, the natural and social sciences emerged from religion, just as they're very keen to say that our understanding of the rule of law and human rights emerged from religion. Great claims are made about Christianity, for example, as having had this influence in our Western tradition of being the originator of ideas of the equality of human beings and rights. One need only say that Christianity remained consistent for 1,800 years with slavery, the attitude that it took to women, the fact that it supported tremendous social hierarchies, in fact even had as part of its metaphysic the idea of the great chain of being from the worm to the deity, in which man was at the center, but man was higher than the other animals and higher than women, of course, and that there was the hierarchy of angels and archangels, principalities and powers. So the idea of hierarchy, the idea of the divine right of kings, none of this seems to be very promising from the point of view of a human rights agenda about the equality of human beings. So how they can claim that is very difficult to say. But they also claim, that out of inquiry, debate, discussion in the church, in theology, came the kind of discussion and inquiry which gave rise to science. And so that makes one take a couple of steps back and ask whether it is really true that science emerged from religion. Well, now, there is a story to be told, and it's one referred to by Mr. Pataki, about the origins of religion in animism. It's one of our best understandings of the kind of outlook of our ancestors for many, many tens of thousands of years, many, many tens of thousands of years before the young religions of Judaism, Christianity, and Islam emerged just in the last 2,000 to 3,000 years, at a time, by the way, when monarchical and hierarchical social structures gave us our model of a sort of kingly deity who issues commands. Now, it happens to be quite a separate matter that religion in our last 2,000 years, or perhaps slightly less, has in part addressed itself to the emotional needs of people. But it's a very unhistorical view to think that religion has always been about human emotions. In fact, it's rather distinctive of versions of Christianity that it preaches an individual relationship between a human being and the deity, such that you can have whispered conversations in bed at night and so on. Most religions in the past were not personal religions. Think about Roman religion. That was a public religion or set of religions. The empire embraced many different views, but what it wanted was public observance of the rites, of the celebrations, the feasts, for reasons of social cohesion. They didn't think that Jupiter and Juno and Mars and the other Roman gods were available for private confession or were interested in private prayer. What people had was the Lares and Penates, the gods of the spirits of the hearth, which were their own, sort of touch wood kind of tutelary deities that they could appeal to if things were going wrong or they were ill or needed a bit of luck. But that's a quite different thing from what is preached by in Christian moral psychology, which is about this possible personal relationship. It's, by the way, if you decide that you want a religion for purposes of relationship, then I should go for Catholicism, because there are loads of beings that you can relate to. It's not just Jesus and God, Mary, all the saints, and Saint Mary, the Australian one, and so on. So what one can say is that the origin of science and the origin of religion share a common ancestor. It's not that science emerges from religion, it's that they have a common ancestor. The same sort of point you make to creationists about monkeys. They say, human beings are not descended from monkeys. And you say, that's dead right, they're not. That monkeys and human beings have a common ancestor, and they diverged a long time ago. The common ancestor of religion and science is ignorance in the early... In the early phases of our ancestors' development, and science has been, with serious interruptions and inconveniences from its fellow descendant, has been having more success latterly than the religions did. You can regard the relationship between religion and science as they evolved separately from this common ancestor, somewhat like the relationship between Cro-Magnon man, which is us, and the Neanderthals, which is them. And in fact, you can be a little bit more specific about the sort of relationship that might come out of traditional and ancient beliefs on the one hand, and the sorts of ways of thinking and kinds of theories on the basis of which we operate now. Think about, for example, the tradition of witchcraft, which is still very strong in Africa. I mean, I don't know whether you sometimes see the news that comes out of Kenya and Nigeria about terrible things that are done to children, you know, having nails knocked into their heads and so on because they're believed to be possessed by demons, or they believe to be witches. That goes on today, and it's a human rights scandal of quite a major proportion. But belief in witches and in demon possession was endemic in European society also for very many centuries. Now, the connection between witchcraft and, say, modern psychology, modern medicine, modern botany, is an oblique one. There is a connection in this sense that psychology explains to satisfaction and to our capacity for management some of the phenomena that were thought to be symptomatic of witchcraft in the past. So forms of psychosis or neurosis or just difference, or the fact that a woman was wise and knowledgeable, knew how to deal with medical complaints, branded her as a witch if somebody didn't like her. And we now have account of this now, and we can explain those phenomena in these terms. Nowadays, I hope at any rate in Australia and the UK and elsewhere, we don't think in terms of witchcraft, but we do look to our resources in empirical psychology and in botany for the herbalism and medicine side of things, and to modern medicine, to address the sort of phenomena that once were thought of or seen through the lens of witchcraft. Now, in just the same way, you could say that almost everything in the natural and social sciences, and in our study of history and in our study of philosophy, has this oblique, off-to-the-side relationship with religion, or the religions, which in the deep past were almost the only resource that people had for trying to construct some kind of story about the world, some framework of understanding, some set of concepts through which they could interpret their experience and talk about the world. So it's not that modern science, that religion is ancestral to modern science. On the contrary, if you think that our very remote ancestors had only the resource of projecting their felt sense of agency into the world as a way of explaining the wind and the tides and the sun and the thunder, and that as time went by, so a separation occurred between what they were able to make sense of on the basis of experience and inquiry, and these other stories that became more and more symbolic and less and less referential to the actual world. Then one can see something like this. One of the great turning points in the development of civilizations was agriculture, was settling down to cultivate grains and to look after plants, which involved no longer traveling around with the herds, but settling down. And out of that came urbanization. Out of urbanization came all the arts of writing and education and the rest, which have been very constitutive of the development of civilization. And so it's tremendously interesting to look at the contrast between agriculture as a kind of an applied science or an applied technology as against religious explanations and religious technologies by means of taboo and prayer and sacrifice. And if you think about our agricultural ancestors, who found out about rotation of crops and about letting the soil lie fallow and about fertilizing the soil and about irrigating it and about breeding strains of grain that were resistant to disease, eventually the discovery of pesticides. Now, all these things came out of direct empirical experience, trial and error, effort, observation, and reason, very distinctive of the intelligence of human beings in solving problems that life posed to them. Now, if you tried sprinkling holy water instead of irrigating, or if you tried prayer instead of fertilizing, or if you tried broadcasting the seed just any old where without thinking about the soils and about letting the soils breathe and so on, you would have much less success. In fact, you would have no better success than chance, or probably less, if you tried something purely on the basis of religion. I mean, to caricature the difference, it's a bit like this. Try lighting your house by prayer instead of by electricity, and you see which one works. So the strands of thinking, the one that developed